Hello, and welcome to Field Lab Earth, the podcast that's all about past and present advances in the fields of agronomic, crop, soil, and environmental sciences. Today, we'll be talking to Dr. Cynthia Rosenzweig about crop modeling to combat climate change. Cynthia is the 2022 World Food Prize Laureate, which is the equivalent of the Nobel Prize in Agriculture. She's worked with farmers, researchers, politicians, and more worldwide to help us prepare for and combat the effects of climate change. This episode, Cynthia discusses her work as a crop modeler, her work with farmers, politicians, and other stakeholders, and how we can all work together for lasting change. Don't forget to listen to the end of the show for our student spotlight. I'm your host, Abby Morrison. Let's talk about science. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show. Today we have Dr. Cynthia Rosenzweig with us. Cynthia is a senior research scientist at the NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies and the co-located Columbia University Earth Institute Center for Climate Systems Research. Dr. Rosenzweig's specific area of expertise is climate change and food systems. At NASA GISS, she heads the Climate Impacts Group, whose mission is to investigate the interactions of climate, both variability and change, on systems and sectors important to human well-being. Dr. Rosenzweig is the co-founder and a member of the executive committee of the Agricultural Model Intercomparison and Improvement Project, or Agnip, a globally integrated transdisciplinary study of climate change in the food system at regional, national, and global scales, including the participation of over 1,000 leading researchers from developed and developing nations. In 2019, Dr. Rosenzweig was coordinating lead author of the Food Security Chapter for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, Special Report on Climate Change and Land. A recipient of the Guggenheim Fellowship, Dr. Rosenzweig has developed new methods of detection and attribution of observed changes in physical and biological systems to anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions and pioneered research on the impacts of and adaptation to climate change and climate variability. She has developed methodologies for the integrated assessment of the climatic and physiological effects of increased CO2 and SO2 on regional, national, and global agricultural production and food security. She's forged scientific knowledge on the role of agriculture in land use and land cover change and advanced critical exploration of teleconnections between the El Niño Southern Oscillation and agriculture at regional and global scales. She's championed innovative research and instituted knowledge networks on global environmental change and urban systems and developed groundbreaking biological and hydrological land surface processes for global circulation models, or GSMs, used in GISS GSM contributions to the IPCC. Dr. Rosenzweig is the 2022 recipient of the World Food Prize, which is considered as the Nobel Prize for Food and Agriculture. Hi, Cynthia. How are you doing today? What an honor to have you on the show.
Hi, Abby. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Wonderful. Well, obviously, you have had quite the illustrious career, as your bio demonstrates for us. So we're so excited to talk to this year's World Food Prize winner. To get us started, can you just talk to us a little bit about what kind of set you on this path? And your early career and some of the early experiences you had that kind of led you to where you are at GISS.
When I was in my early 20s, my husband-to-be and I went to live in Italy, and we rented a farmhouse in Tuscany, and our neighbors came and taught us how to farm. And that's where I fell in love with farming and agriculture. When we came back to the States, I decided I wanted to study agriculture. And then I embarked on studying first at a 2-year ag and technical college, then at Rutgers, which is the land-grant University of New Jersey. And from there, got hooked up with NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies, which we pronounce GISS.
Oh, perfect. That will very much help me moving forward. How long were you in Italy for?
About 2 to 3 years. And we picked olives. We took part in the grape harvest. We raised our tomatoes. We raised goats. We had chickens and collected the eggs. And I just fell in love with the bounty of the earth. nature's bounty. And so that's when I decided when I come back, I'm going to study it. So that's when I started studying and continued studying all the way through my PhD at University of Massachusetts later on.
What an idyllic entree into the field. How wonderful. Living the dream. Okay, so then my next question is, so GIS, as we mentioned in the bio, is part of NASA. So I think the natural question then would be, if you are studying climate change on Earth and farming and agriculture on Earth, why is NASA like the route to go there? Can you talk to me about how NASA research dovetails with the kinds of things you're doing and what that global picture is?
NASA conducts missions and creates models at the global scale for planetary challenges and issues to understand our own planetary system. And one of the challenges facing our planet is our changing climate. And GIS, my home institute, is the home of one of the global climate models that makes the projections of how the climate will change with increasing greenhouse gases. So when I first got there as a graduate student, there were some of the first projections of how the climate would be changing with increasing carbon dioxide and other gases. And Jim Hansen, who was the director at the time, was from Iowa. And he asked this question, what will happen to food? And I was the only person in the building with training in agronomy. And so I started answering that question really quite a while ago. And I've been answering that question in my research career ever since.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I mean, I guess for me personally, not a NASA expert, I always think of like, space exploration, going outside of our planet. But it makes a lot of sense to try to understand our own planet better before we go to other ones.
That's right. That's right. NASA does both space and our own planet. And let me talk a little bit about the remote sensing part of NASA too, which is just a big part, all the satellite missions that NASA conducts with the instruments that really are constantly improving the measurements of our physical planet and our biological planet, our water planet, so NASA is focused on the global scale, but also these remote sensing images are fantastic for understanding agricultural scenes, farming scenes, because in the end of the day, farming starts in the field. And so NASA really helps on both scales, both the field scale and all the way up to the global scale.
Lovely. Yeah. And of course you need both. So that's good job, NASA. And good job to you and your team and everyone who works there. So we've talked then about you working on the modeling. So can you tell us a little bit about the types of models that you have personally been developing, how you've gone about developing these models and what their purpose is?
Sure. So what's a model? The models that we use. So it's not a terrarium, it's not a physical model. It's mathematical representation of interrelated agricultural processes. So one of the main type of models that Agnip uses are called dynamic process crop models, or just crop models. And basically, those mathematical equations, which are programmed into the computer, allow us to grow crops in the computer. So they're based on all the many field experiments that are done at all the experiment stations, for example, associated with our land grant colleges. But the data that come out of those experiments then are developed into the equations that go into the computer. And so here's a little bit more about how they're done. So we put in what's the weather and the climate conditions into the computer. So, and we do this first for the current climate. And then what's the soil properties like? What is the nitrogen? What's the water status? What's the carbon in the soil organic matter? Then when we plant the crop, what is the variety? What's the cultivar? What are the growth stage characteristics? And then there's always people involved in agriculture. And so what's the management? What's the fertilizer regime? What's the irrigation? And so what those mathematical equations do is they grow the crop mostly on a daily basis with the rooting, the shoots, and the leaves up to the grain. And then from all of those conditions, we get the outputs of the yield, the quality, the water use, everything about the crop. So, how do we use these models for climate change? So, we first test them on the current climate and we compare them to the data and make sure they're doing a good job. That's called calibration and validation. But then what we do, and this is why they're so useful, is that then we take projections of how the climate may be changing in the future and we run the same model with those climate projections, and then we can compare what the future climate will bring to the crop compared to the current.
Wow, that is such a beautifully done explanation. I feel like models just they're a little scary to me because there's so many inputs and so many things going on that I'm never sure what thread to pull on first. So that's a super helpful explanation, and I'm sure it's just an unending rabbit trail.
So yeah, and let me also add a really important part about the models too. So it's not that we just say this is what will happen in the future climate, but by changing the water resource use, the irrigation, let's say by changing the cultivar, maybe putting in the computer a more drought resistant cultivar, what we're really working on is how to adapt, how farmers all over the world can adapt to the changing climate.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I feel like whenever I hear like climate change projections used, it's frequently a very negative thing of like all very doom and gloom, or so it's nice to have that optimism and hope kind of baked into your approach of, let's work together and fix this together. I like that very much. Big fan of optimism over here. So we'll talk more about that later, I'm sure. So you've mentioned Agnip before. We've mentioned it in your bio and in passing conversation. So you had a large role in Agnip coming to be. So can you tell us about what Agnip is, kind of what their goals are? I know specifically farmers play a big role in that as well. And then maybe some of your success stories, some of the steps forward you've taken, real world impacts, things like that.
So we founded Agnip in 2010 at American Society of Agronomy. It was a side event. It was a pre-meeting to the ASA annual meeting, the Tri-Society's annual meeting. And we gathered modelers, not only crop modelers, but climate modelers, climate experts, climate modelers, crop modelers, and economists. And we all came together to form a network with the goal of improving the projections of how climate change will affect food and agriculture. Previously, there had been lots of studies, but they had been done in a very uncoordinated way. What Agnip does is it brings teams of modelers together to create protocols or rules for what everyone will do with their models. It's not the same models. Everybody brings their models, but they all do the same thing with their models. Therefore, we're getting a coordinated look at what the projections really will be. It's a step, it's an advance in the science and the rigor of the projections. And that we call that an ensemble approach, ensemble-based and protocol-based approach, so that we have then we call it it's like a population of models, and then are able to say, here's the mean of the models, here are the outliers. We understand the uncertainties around the projections in a much more rigorous way. In regard to success stories that with Agnip's project around the world, here's some examples. We've worked with the government of Pakistan to update their land use planning tools, and they've committed support for climate adapted crops as a result of Agnip's modeling. In Zimbabwe, we've modeled the impact of rising temperatures and drier conditions to help Zimbabwe create their national climate strategies and to develop new mixes of legume, livestock, and crop husbandry. And we've also worked a great deal in Ghana, where we've forecasted a drop in maize yield of 12 to 20%, 7% increase in poverty, thereby recommending varieties with a longer life cycle for Ghana. So these are examples of the kind of outcomes that come from the Agnip modeling and projects.
Oh, I love that. When you say ensemble, I think of like a symphony and how, music builds when you have more instruments and, so maybe Agnip is kind of getting everybody in the same key. Is that kind of an appropriate analogy?
It is. Yes, Agnip is very much like a symphony, getting everyone in the same key. Yes, exactly, with a conductor. That's right. Very true. And there are lots of teams in Agnip. They're all over the world. There are agricultural researchers who are part of it. And we also have livestock teams. We have pest and disease teams. We have water resource teams. And then they interconnect when they need to. So it's very, very lively. I think it's a new kind of science that it's really collaborative, collegial, and very, very forward-looking. We're just advancing the science to not only utilize the models, but also to improve the models. The I in Agnip stands for two things. One is intercomparison. That's what we've been talking about with the ensemble and protocol approach. But the second meaning of the I is improvement, because we can't just be sitting around using the same models all the time. We have to improve them. So we have wonderful teams who are working on, for example, the equation of the response to heat in the computer models. Teams have like a heat team has done a great job of improving that response in the models. That's an example of the improvement, not just the intercomparison.
Hi everyone, I hope you're enjoying the show. Interested in learning more? Cynthia was recently interviewed for a feature in CSA News. It will be freely available for the next 2 weeks. We'll have a link to it in the show notes. Thank you for being our sponsor. Let's get back to the show. The other part of Agnip that's really important is not only, just calibrating and creating these models, but then making them practical for the farmers who are doing the boots on the ground work of growing the crops in real life, not in the computer. It's definitely a very important partnership there. So can you talk about the importance of a farmer-focused approach and how you stress that in the creation of Agnip, and then how some of this work between these different teams has translated into feasible approaches that farmers can use, success stories, real world impacts, anything like that?
Sure. So when we do projects in Agnip, it's always stakeholder driven. That means that we start in listening mode to the farmers in a farming region, and we do this all over the world. We've done many projects in Africa, South Asia, Latin America, Asia. We listen to what the farmers and the farmers groups are telling us about what they need in regard to adaptation and resilience to increasing extreme events that climate change is bringing, for example. And then we have a process in which we listen, then we do some modeling, we show the results, and the stakeholders, the farmers say, well, you know what? We really actually want you to explore this intervention. What about this new legume that we want to test? Then we go back, put them in the models. The team puts it in the model. Then we go back again. We call this the stakeholder spiral interaction. And that's why, so we're not just over in our ivory towers or right, just focusing on our computers. It's really not like that. It's very much an interactive process with the people on the ground who are making the decisions. That is the whole idea, is to help the folks make better decisions about the changing climate.
Oh, I love that. I love the participatory approach. I love just taking those cyclical steps forward. Huge fan. So I feel like one of the themes of our conversation so far has really been, global problems need global solutions and need people around the globe to solve them. Go figure. So another large facet of your work then has been kind of activism and politics of bringing in leaders and governmental leaders then to lend their support and get behind the cause and rally with you. So you've worked with the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the UN, various politicians, etc. There's a Nobel Prize in there. So can you talk about some of your experiences, what drives those interactions, and some of the fruit that you've seen from that?
So one of the things about climate change is that it is a global challenge. And so the United Nations has developed the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which brings researchers from all over the world to periodically, it's about once every 6 or 7 years, do major reports. And then there are special reports too, major reports and special reports on key topics. So because I was one of the early researchers to take the challenge of climate change on in regard to research, I've been involved with the IPCC almost since the beginning. So, and it's just been an amazing experience because on our author teams, for example, on the special report on land, which was published in 2019, we had African scholars, we had Brazilian scholars, we had from Asia, and all of them are bringing their own perspectives and knowledge from their own agricultural systems. And then we come together and we have to create a chapter all together. So it's very lively as we're assessing the latest knowledge. And the point of it is to bring forward the latest knowledge for the decision makers of the world in all the countries as they decide what they are going to be doing in regard to climate change policy.
Big fan of everything in this entire conversation. I love that. I feel like one of our goals as a show is to provide information outside of people's regular disciplines, right? So that people that are researching different things can be inspired and think, hey, maybe that would work for my research project, or, that's a cool hack for in the fields to, whatever it is. So hearing about this it just has a special place in my heart. So then you do a lot of work as part of this, not only as a scientist, but kind of a translator of science, then connecting the dots between research, farmers, politicians, general public. You're really all across the entire spectrum. So can you talk a little bit about strategies that you use when you're connecting those dots, how you may adapt? I don't want to, it's not like you're changing the information, but how you communicate it to different audiences, and just, obviously people care about different things at different levels. They have different interest levels, different science knowledge levels. How do you navigate all of that? Are there lessons you've learned, or just things you like about it? Just talk to me about the whole process.
Sure. Well, Abby, this is the age of the podcast. So really, we on the research side are very much really looking to you and your colleagues who are developing this kind of communication tool. It really, really helps us because we do get a bit nerdy, I would say, and and are just like we're deep in our models, deep in our results, and often probably giving TMI, too much information. And so what we really do now is work with folks just like you who say, look, let's figure out a way to explain climate change and food, impacts on food, and also the other way back, emissions of greenhouse gases from the food system. Let's figure out ways that anybody can, and everybody can understand it. And that helps us too, because we need to be able to, we absolutely in this day and age have to be able to communicate with everybody. So we're really looking to you and we call it comms for communications, and comms experts. One thing that we've done in Agnip is create the Agnip Impacts Explorer. And maybe what we could do is add in the website or into the podcast. And this, from our work in Africa and South Asia, we made it's a software in which people can put in their location, the location that they're interested in, their what years they're interested in the projections, what kind of climate system, and then it brings back the results in a very straight, easy way to say, oh yes, well, this is what's going to happen to the crop yields. This is what's going to happen to the poverty levels. This is what's going to happen, and this is what happens with the adaptation that we're testing. So that's one of the main ways that we've been working on communicating.
Oh, that's a great idea. People love data and games, and I mean, obviously it's not like a game in the usual sense, but the gamification kind of assets there are obviously super helpful, I'm sure. So that flows really well into one of my last three questions. I'm gonna pull the rug out on our usual listeners and swap two of them here. So I think, looking at those impacts in that system, we will definitely get a link for that in the show notes. Kind of leads into what is normally our second to last question, which is how can people, get involved with this, whether it's, small steps that the general public or research can take towards mitigating climate change, or a farmer, or writing a letter to somebody. Like what can people do to get their foot in the door on some of these things?
Yes. Well, first of all, the farmers know best. They are the ones on the ground experiencing if there are changing climate variables in their region. So really, a lot of times we listen to them rather than, we're saying, come and listen to us. So that's just very, very fundamental that Agnip and I have just the deepest respect for the farmers in this country and in all around the world. We have our Agnip website so that all of Agnip is represented there. So at www.agnip.org, that's a great place to start. But what we also do, and I wanted to share that we're beginning to plan some of our regional studies in the U.S. We're still getting all the funding lined up and everything, but we're very much hoping that this will happen. And one would be in the U.S. Midwest with the corn and soybean region, one in the Hudson Valley, the dairy farmers there. And another, we're in discussion with the Intertribal Bison Council. So keep an eye on the website. If these projects get going, then that would be that would be an opportunity for farmers and regional folks in those regions to be actively involved in an Agnip project.
Great. Those are great ways to be involved. So then, what is normally the first, but is now the second question? Where can listeners go to learn more? I know we've kind of talked about the Agnip website, which I would guess would be maybe one of your primary sources.
Right.
But are there other resources that they can lean on?
Well, yes. So first, the Agnip website and the Agnip Impacts Explorer. Those are, and we have over, by now I think hundreds of publications. But what we're developing now also, it's in process, is we're developing a primer on modeling. That's what we think we need to like get out there for everybody to understand what modeling is. Just as we started the conversation, you're saying, well, wait a minute, what is this modeling? What's it all about? But now I think people are beginning to understand that, oh yeah, there's these amazing tools that complement the field experiments, right? But that we can do many, many more experiments in the computer than we can at the field. So we'll be developing a primer also, but also look up Agnip. There's just basically a gazillion publications that really share all the things that we're learning.
Wonderful. Those are great resources as well. We'll include links to all those. I also wanted to highlight the World Food Prize website. Obviously, you are this year's laureate. Congratulations. What a great opportunity and an honor to talk to you today. So they have a full bio and piece on all of the work that you've done throughout your wonderful, wonderful career. So we'll have links to that as well. You can also learn more about the World Food Prize. We had a podcast about Norman Borlaug, who is the founder of the Food Prize. So we'll include a link to that as well. So then final question, which hopefully this will not be on the bio for the World Food Prize, is what is one fun fact that listeners wouldn't know about you if all they had was your research?
So when we came back from Italy, we actually then had a farm in upstate New York in the Hudson Valley. And one of the crops that we grew was pickling cucumbers. And we raised bushels and bushels and bushels of cucumbers. And we sold them to a pickling factory in New York City so that they could go along with the New York corned beef and pastrami sandwiches. That's my fun fact.
Oh, I love that. I'm such a huge fan of pickles. I love those kinds of sandwiches. I'm growing cucumbers with some success. Not a lot.
You have to pick them early because otherwise they blow up. Yes.
Yes.
Otherwise they blow up to be this big, and then they're not good anymore. You have to pick them early.
I didn't know that. This is so good to know because I had some very strangely shaped cucumbers last year. I tend to over love my plants and kind of end up damaging them from over attention. So I'm learning. I'm taking my first steps as a gardener, and so
Very good.
well, wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. It has been an absolute pleasure, an honor to get to talk to you. Congratulations again on winning the equivalent of the Nobel Prize in agriculture. Huge victory. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Abby. I'm so thrilled and honored to receive the World Food Prize this year. Climate change is becoming such a key issue for our planet, and I'm just thrilled that I can be part of the World Food Prize and bringing the challenges of climate change to farmers, to our food system through in the United States and throughout the world. So thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me to be on the ASA podcast. Thank you.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Student Spotlight, where we highlight the work of graduate and undergraduate society student members. Today, we'll be talking to Ritika. Welcome to the show. Can you start us off by introducing yourself and where you're studying?
Hi, Abby. Thank you for having me. I'm Ritika Lamichane. I'm originally from Nepal and currently pursuing my master's degree in plant science at the University of Idaho.
Wonderful. And what are you currently researching?
My research is a USDA-funded statewide project, and one of the objectives of this project is updating fertilizer guidelines for different crops. And at the University of Idaho, we are conducting study trials for different wheat and barley varieties. We are also using handheld and drone-based sensors, which is pretty exciting. What these sensors do is they help in estimating how dense our crops are and finally make an yield estimation, which will help the growers in nitrogen management.
Wonderful. And if you could have your dream research project, what would that look like?
So I would like to work more in research activities that will help in achieving a sustainable future in agriculture. This could involve using different precision agriculture tools, such as precise spraying of nutrients to where it actually is needed, reducing runoff from fertilizer and irrigation. Also, we can monitor our crop yield. So I'm looking forward to working in this kind of projects.
Awesome. If anyone would like to get in touch with Ritika about her work, we'll have her contact information in our show notes. Thank you so much for being on the show today, and best wishes on your future studies and career. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Field Lab Earth. More information can be found in the description below. Thank you.